All right, here we are. Okay, excellent. Here we are on another Wednesday doing another Facebook live event. And today we're going to talk about something I hope you find interesting, which is, can HR be an ally in workplace bullying? And if so, how is that even possible? Well, let's just jump in and find out. So, I'm going to tell you a little story about a couple of things that happened to me, that how I view HR has significantly changed. So, if you've heard me speak, if you've listened to my podcast, if you've read anything that I've written on my website, you know that I was bullied for a very, very long time, for over about 20 years. And so I've had a wide array of experiences, and I've dealt with HR a lot. And oftentimes that relationship was not as an ally, it was tension and it was conflictual, because I wanted HR to do something and I expected HR to intervene in workplace bullying to stop what was happening to me. And they never did. Not once did HR ever intervene on my behalf. The most of the time I was bullied, I would say probably the whole time, HR did not see me as somebody who was being bullied. They saw me as the person in the workplace who was causing the problems. Okay? So I was the one who was mistreated by HR, who was, called out by HR for being the problem. Or, I was called a troublemaker. So I refer to myself as being the troublemaker in the workplace. So they saw me, in fact, not as a person who was bullied. They saw me as the person who was doing the bullying and who was mistreating others. Okay, so that's the first mistake that HR makes when looking at people in the workplace. They identify who's right and who's wrong. That's a mistake to do. Okay, so we'll come back to that. So the first mistake HR makes is trying to pick a side, and they often do. Many times that's the wrong side of who's being aggressive in the workplace and who's the one, who's the victim. Okay. So I never had HR ever intervene on my behalf because they saw me as the problem. Okay. And is that HR's fault? Yes, of course it is. It's 100% HR's fault. Okay. But again, HR does not get a pass or anything like that. So please don't think that this is what we're talking about. What I'm talking about is that HR doesn't understand what workplace bullying is. And so when you don't understand the problem, you can't figure it out, and you're clueless on how to intervene. So 99% of the time, HR doesn't know how to intervene because they use the definition, which is still the standard definition of workplace bullying, which is the definition that says there's somebody in your workplace. Yes, it can be more than one perpetrator. The definition does not use the word perpetrator. That's my add-in. Okay, it says you have people in your workplace who are going after. Often they use the term targeted. Okay, so somebody is causing somebody in the workplace, another colleague, harm. Okay, and it basically says that it can be any of these things, verbal, nonverbal, cyber, emotional, or physical. It can be, overt or covert, or any combination of that. It has to go on for a period of time, and it has to impact the person who's being bullied. So like myself, has to impact your health. Excuse me. I'm having a hard time getting my words out. It might impact your personal life and your professional life. Okay. Most definitions don't even add in the personal and professional. They just say you have people in your workplace who are that are abusing. They don't use the term abuse. That are, have these behaviors that are aimed at another person. That's essentially it. Okay, well, if you look closely at the definition of conflict, those two are damn near interchangeable. Okay, and also what I really don't like about that definition, it doesn't even address the real problem. That definition is only about me, basically. Yes, there's these other people out there, but these behaviors are directed at me. I'm the one who has to be influenced and hurt by it. The definition doesn't even say hurt. Okay, so you can go to my website, stopbullyculture.com, where I've updated my definition and have added other pieces to the definition that make it much more user friendly, and it actually addresses the real problem. Okay, so they're using this definition. That's why they're trying to find somebody who's right, who's the one engaging in the aggression, and who's on the receiving end, because that's what the basic definition says. Okay, which that definition, it's a good foundation, but it doesn't cut the mustard when it comes to what workplace bullying is. So they're not working with all the knowledge they need to address workplace bullying. So that's the first mistake, is they're not working, they don't understand what workplace bullying is, so they're starting 20 yards behind the starting goal, the starting post, okay? So they're way behind if you're using that definition, because what we know is true is that there are other things going on behind the scenes. And what I've added to my definition is corrosive group dynamics, okay? That there's people have underestimated or maybe they have purposely left out in their discussions of workplace bullying bystanders, okay? And the problem that bystanders bring to the table when it comes to workplace bullying. So again, if you haven't listened to season 2 of Exposing Workplace Bullying, it's called The Bystander Effect. So we spend 8 episodes looking at bystanders and looking at them for what they are, not for this idea that somehow they're neutral or that they've somehow, they're not involved. Okay, that's ludicrous. They are the reason that bully culture is sustained. Okay, because it behind the scenes, it affects and corrodes healthy team dynamics into, lack of a better term, dynamics that are a real shit show. Okay, because of groupthink, because of peer pressure, because they want to be part of the in-group, they allow the bully to take power, and they go along to get along because they're trying to get something out of the bully too. Because in the workplace, no matter where the bully is on the hierarchy, they are at the top of the heap because they are pulling the strings. They're the puppet master, so to speak, which affects HR. HR is often manipulated by the bully. Okay, again, because of these corrosive group dynamics, which affects our bias in the workplace. So oftentimes when we talk about bias, we're looking at bias around race and gender and, socioeconomic status and ability and religion, all these things that affect how we see other people. Okay, in the workplace, and when I'm talking to students about bias, I always use my beautiful glasses as an example, is like my bias is built into me because of who I am, all of my identity boxes that I check. And so sometimes I'm privileged, sometimes I'm not, etc. And so I learn about identity, what's important, what's valued on my socialization and from my family, friends, work, etc. And so when we come into work, we are affected by the workplace and how we see other people, okay? And if I want to see people differently, I first have to acknowledge the bias, and then, hence my glasses come in, I need to put on corrective lenses so that I can see more clearly, okay? And that's the same thing that happens with HR. They are not immune from the impact and the manipulation of workplace bullies. In fact, if they think they are, then that's a whole nother problem, okay? Yes, because HR, I hate to say it, you're not that difficult to manipulate. You're just not. And frankly, nobody is in the workplace. That's why bystanders go along to get along, okay? But bystanders, again, are seen as this neutral. They're not seen as part of the problem, okay? And in my definition, I make them front and center. So go listen to season 2 of Exposing Workplace Bullying. So what happens is when your bully is back there telling stories about you, making up rumors about you, lying about you, criticizing you in public, doing all their dirty tricks and shenanigans that make them, the top bully, that behavior influences people at work, okay? Bystanders and HR. And because lots of times what your bully is doing, and this is something it never crossed my mind until one day the light bulb went on, because I was wondering, why does HR hate me so much? Well, because my bullies and all the bystanders in my workplace were going to HR, telling HR I was the problem, right? And so HR was then being manipulated. They're hearing all of this stuff about me. What a troublemaker I am. What a problem I am, right? I'm always, I'm causing problems, so people even have asthma attacks, okay? That's the kind of crap the bullies were saying behind my back to anybody who was listening, and they buddied up to HR. They were friends with HR, okay? And so then HR starts to see me as, is Jan a problem? She seems okay, but I keep getting all these emails about, other people, and I like Bob. Bob is a nice guy. I can't see him bullying anybody, right? And so then she gets my side or confirmation bias. The HR starts to buy into this narrative, just like bystanders, this narrative about me. And the thing with HR, it's not just Bob going to HR, it's all the bystanders too going in, because Bob's encouraging people, your bully is encouraging people to make reports to HR. So then HR starts to think, yep, Jan is the problem. Then when I start to say, I would like you to investigate Bob for bullying, that's confirming their bias that I am the problem. So the very thing like reporting and talking to HR, which is what most people tell you to do when you're being bullied, is in fact making a confirmation to HR that you're the problem. Right? So you see how it's super complicated, that all of these pieces are sucked into this culture of bullying. And bystanders, they normalize workplace bullying. So you know what? I wasn't perfect in the workplace. And did I engage in some pretty ugly behavior back to the people who were bullying me and to the people who were watching? You're damn straight I did. Because in a bully culture, the norm just keeps going lower and lower. So yelling in meetings is not an exception, it becomes the norm. So even people who are bullied, and if they tell you different, they're not being truthful, often engage in bad behavior back because that's what's normalized. Right? So I yell back at Bob in a meeting because we're all yelling, okay? And so then HR starts to see me as the problem. Now, here is one thing that HR can do. is that if you have 10 people against one, okay, that in and of itself should tell you that you have a big ass problem on your hands. And it isn't the one person, it's the 10 others that are causing the problem. And you have got a toxic and bully culture happening. You're just not looking at it objectively. Okay, so HR, you shouldn't be happy when people are tattletaling, for lack of a better word, about other colleagues. If you're running a tight ship, you should be knowing what's happening. You don't need other people to tell you. And if you have a consistent person coming to your office, that is a massive red flag. It's basically Bob wearing a neon sign that says, "Hey, HR, I'm a bully." But you think they're giving you insight into the organization when in fact what they're really doing is you're being manipulated. And you fall for that stuff over and over and over again. So by the time I even make the report, you've already decided that I'm the problem. So the other thing is that if you haven't talked to everybody objectively, okay, again, I never had HR bring me in and have a one-on-one conversation for me to provide my evidence and my side of the story. What they did is they took the side of the 10 over the 1, or the 11 over the 1, or the 12 over the 1, right? They took everybody else's opinion, their version of it, rather than saying, it doesn't make sense that we would have everybody saying the exact same thing and one person saying the exact opposite. Because what you have there, again, is, in my definition, that corrosive group dynamic where they're all lying to cover for Bob, because they also have my side bias, but they also are trying to get something from Bob. They're trying to get promotion. They want Bob to give them a good evaluation. All of those things are happening at the same time. So you can see that with that foundation definition that often HR uses doesn't even come close to dealing with workplace bullying from a real perspective. And then the last thing that my definition also includes is that it's a leadership problem. You know, like 65% of the time, bullying happens because it's your boss who's doing it, okay? Again, which puts HR in a real, no-win situation. Because if it's my boss, many times that boss is also HR's boss, okay? Now, here's where, I was a 100% HR's always the problem, yada, 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 okay? Until one time, I had another light bulb moment on when I presented at a conference for HR, okay? So yes, great for them to bring me in, and you probably should be bringing me in again, okay? Because what's on your websites and what you're encouraging people to do is to do the very things like report, which is making things worse. And it's not, and you're not teaching HR the real definition of workplace bullying and how to address it. But many times HR is supposed to address and quote unquote solve these things with their hands tied behind their back. Because most organizations, again, don't know what workplace bullying is, let alone have a policy that actually deals with workplace bullying, okay? And if you want those things, I have a prevention kit on my shop that you can get everything you need to start addressing workplace bullying and preventing it. I give you policies, I give you templates, I give you everything you need. I give you the real definition of workplace bullying. So they don't have policy to solve it. So they do what any of us under those circumstances would do. We try to see what we have, right? What do I have in my policy and procedures book that might fit? Well, what do you know? I have a conflict policy, right? Well, the definition does seem like conflict, so it makes sense that we use conflict. We use go talk to the bully first, then we use mediation and conflict resolution, all things which increase workplace bullying, not decrease it. So they're using what they have and what they're familiar with. What they don't understand is that when you do those things, you're actually adding to the fire of workplace bullying. You're not putting it out. Okay, so they don't have the tools to solve it. The other thing, and I think this is an important piece for us to understand, is that, and this is what I learned at the conference, because I thought I was presenting to a group of human resource people, personnel, who wanted to learn about bullying so that they could stop workplace bullying in their agency. Oh no, I was wrong. They wanted to learn about workplace bullying because they were being bullied. Okay, so if you think about it from a logical, rational perspective, it makes sense, doesn't it? When you think about the position that HR's in, let me say the go-to people for crap that's happening to you in your workplace. Why would we think that if my bully was bullying me, why wouldn't we think they weren't bullying HR? And if I look back at some of the HR personnel that I dealt with, if I look at one university in particular, that university had more departments that had bullying rampant in them than they had healthy. So it wasn't just that HR was dealing with my bully, or bullies as it was. They were dealing with, all the other bullies in the other departments. They were also being bullied and mistreated by them. So if I think coming to work having one or two bullies was bad, coming into work for them was a total shit show. Okay, and there was no anti-bullying policy. There was no procedure for them to investigate honestly and objectively, because the whole university was just one big, cesspool of workplace bullying. Interestingly enough, the director of that HR, she's not there anymore. She moved on to something else. Oh, you think? Yeah, because it's tough to be in a position where all the pressure is on you to solve a problem that your boss is causing, okay? Because HR is also in that double bind. Is yes, they see that Bob is bullying, but Bob is their boss too. So what do you want them to do? But there are things that HR can do, okay? Again, without leadership, and without the right tools, HR isn't going to be able to solve it, okay? Again, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. You can't solve workplace bullying by having one HR director get involved when the problem is leadership problems. They don't know how to hold people accountable, or they are the bully. Corrosive group dynamics, which means lots of people involved, and you have abuse and harm. My definition includes the intent to abuse and harm. The point of it is to hurt. Okay? And so how do you fix that as one person? You can't. Okay? We can't put all of our eggs in one basket with HR. Sorry, HR, you're not saving anybody. You're not. Okay? And I don't expect HR to save to solve workplace bullying. But can they be an ally? And HR, if you're listening, the answer is yes. Okay? It is not your job, okay, to caretake everybody. But here are the things that I wish my HR director would have done, okay? I wish she would have talked to me face to face like I was a human being. She avoided me like the plague. All right? You know what that did to me? Up yours is what I wanted to say. You don't have the decency to speak to me, but I know you're talking to everyone else. That is unacceptable. Even though you might think I'm the problem, it's your job to listen to my story, to hear what I have to say, and also to look at the documented evidence that I'm providing. And if you're not asking Bob for his documented evidence, then that's a problem when you're only looking at mine. And you weren't looking at mine. You did nothing. Okay? So I want you to look at people's documentation. Or at the very least, you should tell them how to document. What is it you need? Okay? And again, you don't even have to do that. You can send them to my website, which has a documentation kit right there for them, right? They can document and I can help them do it. Okay? So you have to and you have to treat people like they're human beings. Everybody in your workplace. Okay? I don't care if you hate my guts. I'm still under your watch. You should treat me with respect and dignity. And that role models good professional behavior. Okay? So you can hear my side of the story, look at my evidence, and try to be as objective as possible. The other thing you can do is, and again, if you're being bullied, you ought to know this, is that there are things that I can do as a person who's being bullied to mitigate the circumstances. I'm not going to stop it, nor am I responsible for the way I was treated. Okay, I never asked to be bullied, and I didn't deserve it, but you could have helped me mitigate the circumstances. You could have helped me learn how to be grounded in meetings. You could have told me to only engage when it was absolutely necessary. You could have told me to stop engaging all the damn time. You could have said something like this: Jan, I get it. You've been here for X amount of years and it's been a difficult work situation. We know it's been a difficult department since it started. You're not going to change that. I want to change it. You want to change it. Let's just try to develop a plan to get you through next week to reduce some of the bullying. And part of that, Jan, is you're going to have to pick your battles. You don't need to engage every time. Choose what you want. And make sure then that you're writing all of those incidents, of workplace bullying down. Stay grounded, pick your battles. When Bob says to you, Jan, you're a piece of shit, you just respond with, okay, Bob, okay, interesting. Using microscripts, there's all different ways that you can work with the person who's making the accusation of bullying, okay? And you can help them mitigate those circumstances. And the beautiful thing about it is if you help somebody else to mitigate circumstances, you can also use those when you're being bullied. You probably have more in common with me, the person being bullied, than you have with Bob. And the other thing that I think is the most important, and frankly the easiest way to start to improve workplaces where bullying has become normalized, and that is workplace standards of behavior. I mean, I am like a broken record with this. If you expect people to have emails that are short, then you need to have an email policy that says your emails should not be 20 pages long, right? So you figure out what are the worst behaviors that are happening, and then you develop policies around those. Or you could even do a better job, which is, like I said, have those workplace standards of behavior, which say when we treat each other, we're going to treat our clients with respect and dignity. We're also going to do the same with our coworkers and our colleagues and our bosses, right? And then you parse that out as to what that means. Does that mean coming in and pointing a finger at you? Oh, that's inappropriate. Okay? You see what I'm saying? So if you don't have the conversation about what's acceptable, what you're doing is you're allowing people to be unacceptable. There need to be parameters around how people act and behave. And you never have to use the word bullying. But you can, and I suggest starting with the thing that's the most problematic, which is oftentimes cyberbullying and the use of email or Teams or Slacks or those sorts of things. So, can HR be an ally? I think the possibility is out there. But from my point of view, from a realistic point of view, okay, I'm sorry, HR, you're not the villain in workplace bullying, but you're always, almost always, the villain's sidekick because you don't really know what workplace bullying is. Maybe you've done a Google search. That ain't cutting it, my friends. Okay, so you have to understand that it's not interpersonal conflict, that it is also all of these other things that add to it, which make your conflict resolution strategies blow up. Boom, right? It makes it worse. Okay, and so you have to know what it really is. You also have to check yourself. You have bias, right? We all do. It's part of being in the workplace. I have a bias about HR. It makes sense that you would have a bias about me, especially when people are telling you stories about me and you're confirming those things because you have my side bias. So you are often have a lot of bias that you need to check at the door. And you have to know the risk factors. That's another thing. We didn't talk about that today, but there are a lot of risk factors that make your agency, you can almost predict that if you don't have it, you are going to get it pretty soon if you don't put in prevention strategies. Okay, and then you can help by treating the person who's making the allegation of bullying like a human being, getting their side, look at their evidence, and help them mitigate a bad circumstance. Even if you don't stop bullying, listening to what the person is saying and helping them develop strategies is doing yourself a favor. Because if I can decrease the amount of time that I'm engaging with Bob, which decreases the bullying, that's going to decrease the amount of time I want to come and complain to you. So it's a win-win situation when you know what workplace bullying is and how to look and deal with it in an effective way. Okay. And so, again, if you're interested in that, I do HR and leadership coaching. Okay. I could meet with you next week and we could start to talk about those things. So that's option one. And if you don't think that you need coaching when it comes to bullying, well, again, you don't know everything. Trust me, you don't. And often what's out there about workplace bullying isn't designed to help you specifically. So I also have a HR workplace bullying triage checklist, which you can go on my website today and get, which has a checklist of things that helps you identify workplace bullying and things that you can do to address it. There are things you can do, but if you think that you know everything about workplace bullying, then you then become your own worst enemy. And as we evolve and learn more about workplace bullying, what we're going to learn is that there are solutions that are going to be helpful to to HR. So you need to be on top of the new research. So also, you can subscribe to my newsletter and listen to my podcast. There are a ton of ways that I can help you, support you, because one of the things when I was presenting at that workshop, when the light bulb went on that says how we view HR is frankly a problem to solving workplace bullying. All right. Well, I hope everybody's doing well. I will be back here next Wednesday. It's only December 3rd. Here I was thinking we were off a week. So as usual, thank you so much for being here, and I will see you next week.